Welcome to First Look, Washington Post Live's one-stop shop for news and analysis. I'm Jonathan Capehart, associate editor at the Washington Post. Well, it's been exactly 1 week since former President Donald Trump was indicted by special counsel Jack Smith on 37 counts related to mishandling incredibly sensitive classified documents. But it didn't have to be this way. According to the Washington Post, one of Trump's lawyers wanted to pursue a plea deal last fall. Joining me now, one of the reporters on that incredible story, Jackie Alamany, congressional investigations reporter for the Washington Post. Jackie, welcome back to First Look.
Hey, Jonathan, good morning. Thanks for having me.
Okay, which lawyer proposed this plea deal and why didn't it go anywhere?
Yeah, this is veteran Florida litigator Chris Kice, who proposed this deal to other Trump advisors, who then floated it to the former president when he first was hired onto the team last year. It was quickly shot down, and shortly thereafter, he was actually alienated and sort of pushed aside and sidelined from the Mar-a-Lago documents case, and has since sort of been handling all of the other criminal cases that Trump is facing. But we did catch a glimpse of Kice this week, who actually accompanied Trump in Florida for his arraignment, which was a bit unexpected. But Trump has had a bit of trouble finding Florida-based counsel to help him with this next phase of the Mar-a-Lago documents case, as he's now facing 37 charges against him for mishandling, concealing, and obstructing the Justice Department's efforts to recover these documents. But it really shouldn't come as much of a surprise that the former president turned down the effort on behalf of Kice and maybe some of his other lawyers to try to take a more cooperative stance towards the Justice Department, as this would be a bit unusual for the posture, both publicly and privately, Trump has taken towards these myriad investigations.
Jackie, I just want to, so the lawyer is Chris Kice. Correct me if I'm wrong. Isn't he the lawyer who asked to be paid up front before joining the legal team, Trump's legal team?
Yeah, you're a close reader, Jonathan, and that is a move actually that many of the lawyers who are now in the running to become Trump's counsel this time around have been making clear that they would need to have as part of their agreement to come on and represent Trump. After 8 years and really almost 50 years in total in terms of developing a track record for stilting his lawyers and eschewing legal advice. He is a notoriously capricious and challenging client who is known for stiffing some lawyers. I just spoke with one lawyer who said that he drew the red line a few years ago and vowed to never work for Trump or any sort of Trump affiliated PAC again, because Trump owed the firm that this person worked for money. So this, asking for a legal retainer up front is what my colleagues Josh Dawsey and I and others who have been reporting throughout this saga have heard is now a prerequisite for joining the team.
All right, Jackie. So, former Trump Attorney General Bill Barr said says that the indictment, the 49-page indictment, is a very detailed indictment of Trump, and that quote, even if half of it is true, he's toast. Is it as cut and dried as that legally?
Yeah, well, it was certainly startling to hear that from Trump's former attorney general, who has been a pretty staunch proponent of Trump. It has at times been critical and tried to distance himself, but this was certainly his strongest remarks yet. Uh, expressing criticism towards Trump and his actions. I'm not sure I quite agree with that assessment. This is a very long journey that we have ahead. There's several months potentially until the trial actually starts. Jack Smith, the special counsel, has asked for a speedy trial for the obvious reasons. But I think once a lot of this starts playing out in public view and we potentially start seeing a fuller array of discovery and new evidence that has been collected throughout the course of Smith's investigation, public opinion could be changing. And at the end of the day, yes, this is very much a cut and dry legal case. If you
Hmm.
talk to a broad swath of lawyers on the ideological spectrum, but you know, for charges like this, for potentially charging the former president of the United States, a first in American history, you do need that aspect of some public support here, and indictments are always cherry picked, no matter who it is. But there have been many people who have gone to prison for far less than what Donald Trump did in terms of the mishandling of classified documents. So we will be watching closely.
All right, in the less than 5 minutes left, I got to get you on two things. One, Ryan Goodman and Andrew Weissman have a piece in The Atlantic with the headline, Jack Smith's backup option. Donald Trump was indicted in Florida. Could he also face charges in New Jersey? And this created a lot of buzz when it dropped earlier this week. What does your reporting show? Is it a backup option or a certainty or wishful thinking on their part? Do you know?
Jonathan, our team doesn't have any reporting to support this piece by Andrew Weissman and Ryan Goodman, who are obviously both excellent legal minds and thinkers. It could potentially be a possibility, but there was a lot of forethought that went into Smith's decision to ultimately charge the case in Southern Florida, a strategic decision, really. Of
Hmm.
course, it could be possible that maybe there is a separate indictment that could land in New Jersey, as this issue of venue that we've been talking a lot about, where the crimes were actually committed. Obviously, there is a Bedminster aspect to this, as the indictment noted. These two examples of Trump brandishing and showing other people classified documents, according to some of the evidence that Jack Smith obtained, that happened in Bedminster, New Jersey, at his club. So it's not completely out of the realm, but it's not something that we're hearing at the moment.
Okay, and the next one is let's go to Georgia. Fulton County DA Fani Willis continues to send signals that she'll be making a move in her Georgia voter interference case soon. Is it all but a certainty that Donald Trump will be indicted in that case?
Nothing is ever certain. Obviously, there are a lot of signs, public signs, that do indicate that. I mean, this was someone who was on recording, pressuring Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger to reverse his defeat in the state. So they also have a mountain of evidence that is not exculpatory of the former president. But there are so many other considerations that go into this. But unlike Jack Smith, I think Fani Willis has showed her cards a bit more publicly than Smith's January 6th investigation. So if Trump were to be indicted in Atlanta, it wouldn't be as much of a surprise.
And last question in the nanoseconds that we have left. We now know that a judge has set a January, what is it, January 15th, 2024 date for the second E. Jean Carroll defamation suit. There's a January 29th, 2024 trial date for the New York Attorney General Letitia James federal about the pyramid scheme. I think that's the Letitia James. Um, no, this is a pyramid scheme about his company. Letitia James' loss trial comes up March 25th, 2024. I put all those dates out there because I'm just wondering, could Donald Trump spend more time in courtrooms than on the campaign trail in 2024?
Yeah, but those two things, Jonathan, I think for Trump and his team are going to ultimately be one and the same. Trump's team really views these appearances in court as they described it this week, a celebration of sorts, a chance for him to defend himself and display this sort of public bravado and have a show of support from his supporters. Although I will say he probably wasn't thrilled to see the crowd size at the Miami
Mm.
courthouse on Tuesday. They were expecting 10 to 20,000 people, and you could tell by the overhead copter shots that that was certainly not the crowd size ultimately.
And you know what, Jagger, I agree with you. Whether he's in a courtroom or on the campaign trail, it will be one in the same if past is prologue. Jackie Alamini, congressional investigations reporter for the Washington Post. Thanks as always for coming to First Look. Have a good weekend.
Thanks so much, you too.
And we're going to keep the conversation going with the Opinions Roundtable in just a moment. Let's go to the opinion side of the Washington Post, where we will find Washington Post columnists Megan McArdle and Jennifer Rubin. Megan, Jennifer, welcome back to First Look.
Nice to be here.
Thanks for having me.
Sure thing. So, Jennifer, you had a column yesterday saying you believe it is now likely that Trump will also be indicted for his role in the January 6th insurrection. Quickly explain.
I think it's almost a certainty. Nothing is certain, but this is as close as you're going to get. There have been multiple convictions for seditious conspiracy, the serious charge in which people responding to Trump's call to go wild were handed down criminal sentences of a very long stay. It would be manifestly unfair, frankly, for those people who answered the call to go to prison and for Trump to walk. Secondly, he has a mound of evidence, including now, we believe, testimony from the vice president and from Mark Meadows. Third of all, the prohibition, if you will, or the hesitancy about indicting a former president is now gone. He's been indicted twice, once by Jack Smith and once by Alvin Bragg. And lastly, Fani Willis is going to file suit. She's already blocked out the week in August. And if there are enough facts for a phony elector scheme under state law, there's certainly enough for a phony elector scheme under federal law that extends beyond Georgia. So I would be shocked, frankly, if we didn't get some kind of indictment on January 6th. The number of people to be indicted and the specific charges, I think, are still to be determined.
Okay, that's still to be determined. But Megan, let's talk about the indictment that came down a week ago today. You took to Twitter to weigh in on the indictment, saying, and I'm tweeting, and I'm quoting, "Even if he's obviously guilty, maybe the public will care less than I'd expect. Maybe he could eke it out in 2024, but the GOP could also just nominate someone else and not have to worry about any of that." So, Megan, what's the possibility the Republican Party base will just nominate someone else?
At the moment, it's not looking good. I think that there is a recurring problem with the Republican base is this weird oppositional defiant disorder, where they are doing things simply because the libs have told them not to, which is not a good way to run your life. And in fact, I'm actually sympathetic with a lot of their kind of epistemic questions about how authorities have used their power. I think during the pandemic, especially the ways that public health was often politicized, the ways that they got criticized for doing things that in retrospect look smart, like opening schools. That said, the kind of mentality of the Republican base is, I've often said, it's kind of like saying, my new fiance hates my kids, she steals my money, and she does too many drugs and hits me, but my ex-wife hates her, right? And that's not a good way to pick a president, but that's the dynamic that we're stuck in.
Jennifer, I see you have more restraint than I do. Love your reaction.
I think there are two things going on. On one hand, as I have in my newsletter today, there's a very long list of Republicans who are now saying these are serious charges, they're not going to go away, and are even suggesting they wouldn't support Trump if he were convicted. Now, let's not get too excited. That is, of course, a completely normal bare minimum for a thinking person in a democracy. But nevertheless, they range from Mike Pence to Bill Barr to former Congressman Trey Gowdy. So there is definitely a segment of the establishment Republican Party that desperately wants to get away with it. The problem is that they don't have the base, that the base, as Megan says, is still pathologically attached to Donald Trump. Now, as these trials progress and as the number of trials progress, will they begin to get nervous that even if they love Trump, maybe the rest of America isn't ready to elect a felon to the presidency? So I think there is a possibility. And I also think that it's very possible we haven't seen the final field. The current field is probably the best thing Donald Trump has going. It's pretty shabby. DeSantis has made a really rotten entry into the race, and the others seem to be afraid of attacking him. But there are people who still haven't declared their intention out there. There's the governor of Georgia. There is the governor of Virginia. Up until now, they said they aren't interested. But if come next year, this thing is going south, there is no really reason why they couldn't step in. So I think we have a long ways to go. I think we're just the beginning of the process by which Republicans get a good hard look at what they're going to see. And I would say one thing. Because of the need to educate the American people and the Republicans, I think it's essential to have at least some trials concluded before the Republicans go to their convention. If he's going to be exonerated, exonerate him so Republicans can nominate him with good conscience. If he's going to be convicted, they should know that too. To allow this to drag on and to postpone and postpone with this hanging over not only his head, but the nation's head, I think would be a grave disservice.
I'm going to resist the urge to ask about, but what about Miami Mayor Francis Suarez, but who just jumped into the race? But we'll save that for another time. Let's talk about the debacle at Fox News on Tuesday night when both President Biden and Trump were speaking. Fox News put up a banner that read, "Wannabe dictator speaks at the White House after having his political rival arrested." Now, a spokesman for Fox told the Post that the banner was taken down immediately and the issue, quote, was addressed. There's reporting today that the person, a longtime Fox producer, and whose name I cannot remember right now, but it's been reported, his name has been let go. Megan and Jennifer, but Megan, I'll start with you. What do you make of what happened at Fox, and is letting that particular producer go? Alexander McCallan is the name of the producer. Is it Alexander McCaskill is his name, is letting him go and saying that, the issue has been addressed. Is that enough for Fox News to put it behind them?
I mean, I think so. And the reason I think so is that I think that you have to think of this in the larger context of the Tucker departure, right? Mm-hmm. Fox is in the process of attempting to clean house, of attempting to tamp down on the edgelording that got them into major lawsuit trouble. Maybe this is also a moral call. It doesn't matter. They don't want to get sued again. And so, this guy, Alexander McCaskill, was a producer with Tucker Carlson. And you can kind of, I think the way I interpret this is that he knew his days were numbered no matter what, and has decided to go out in a blaze of glory with one final edgelord moment. And I think that you may see somewhat more than this. I expect that they will be putting procedures in place to make it harder for other people to decide to go out with one final troll. But I think that this is actually a symptom of they really are cracking down. They really are going to somewhat reform the problems that led them to the Dominion lawsuit and to the other issues that followed January 6th.
And Jennifer, before you jump in there, listening to Megan and hearing what this guy did, it seems as though before we especially when the text messages came out in that lawsuit, where they were saying one thing on the air and believing something completely different off air. This situation, does that mean that they actually believe this stuff?
It's very difficult to figure out what they believe and what they don't. What we do know is they're afraid of their audience, that they fear, and that was the whole mindset behind the lies regarding the election, that they fear that if they fess up and start telling the truth, that their audience will flee. And so they've gotten themselves trapped into this never-ending cycle of, sort of Pravda-like reporting on the Republicans and kind of making up stuff as they go along and these kind of outrageous claims. And I think they have a problem. If they reform too much, as Megan says, they're going to lose their audience. If they don't, they're going to wind up in litigation again. And I think it's going to be a process of figuring out what they want to be when they grow up. Listen, there's another network that's trying to figure out what they want to be when they grow up, and that's CNN. So right now, I think it's a time of turmoil for cable television news. Ratings are declining. People's viewing habits are changing from TV to online to podcasts and the rest. So I think we're going to have to wait and see how this turns out. But I do find it remarkable that someone could have lasted this long with these types of views and this type of behavior. It speaks to the culture that Fox has created, which is not of a news organization, but which is a political pack and kind of attack propaganda machine. It's a telling sign of what at least the old Fox has been. Whether that's going to be the new Fox or not, we don't know.
Let's turn our attention to, well, actually, we've got a little bit of extra time. Jennifer, I want to just real quickly, before we turn to Russia and Ukraine, the Atlantic piece by Ryan Goodman and Andrew Weissman with the headline, Jack Smith's backup option, Donald Trump was indicted in Florida. Could he also face charges in New Jersey? You're an attorney. And I hope you at least know about this piece. But what do you make of that, of their theory?
I've actually speculated along the same lines, and there are two facts that are somewhat concerning, or at least questionable, raise questions. Nowhere in this indictment is there any charge for dissemination, and we know that 2 acts of dissemination, that is sharing highly classified information, allegedly took place at Bedminster with 2 different groups of people. So that hasn't been charged. And in fact, there's really no mention in the indictment at all about incidents in Bedminster. And that may be because they don't have the evidence. That may be because the documents there were so classified, they really can't use them in a trial, and therefore they're kind of skipping it. But it's also possible that in their back pocket, they think, well, if the Florida litigation slows to a crawl because Eileen Cannon is a loose cannon, as they put it, and is inclined to help Donald Trump, they can always kind of speed things along and file another suit in Bedminster. But remember, there are other lawsuits still to come. There's going to be a criminal indictment in Georgia. There's going to be a criminal indictment in Washington, D.C. So we really are going to have to keep an Excel spreadsheet to kind of figure out what's going on where.
Well, yeah, yeah. Megan, let's turn in the time we have left to Russia and Ukraine. It's entering a critical phase. Ukraine's launching its counter-offensive. I want to play what the U.S. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, how he described it Thursday at a NATO meeting in Brussels. Listen.
We have said before that war is dynamic. It is a contest of wills. As the Secretary just said, it's uncertain, it's violent, and as always, high cost. But we can be sure that Ukrainian bravery, competency, and preparedness will carry the day.
And so, Megan, since the war began, the United States has directed more than $75 billion in assistance to Ukraine, including military, financial, and humanitarian support. But I'm wondering, will the Republican House majority pump the brakes on the pace of that support? Might they tie support to Ukrainian gains on the battlefield?
I think there is a big constituency for pumping the brakes. And again, I think this goes back to the kind of oppositional defiant disorder. Look, I think there are, in fact, real questions about, can Ukraine win this war? Is what we're doing wise? But that's not really what's motivating the Republicans here. What's motivating the Republicans here is that Joe Biden likes Ukraine, and liberals like Ukraine, therefore they don't. Right. And it is all goes back to the Trump-Russia stuff in 2016 and Burisma and all the rest of it, that this thing has gotten bizarrely politicized, and Republicans have often lost sight of the kind of core fact that, like, the Russians are the bad guys. And in any definition that the Republicans would have used before 2016, they would have called the Russians the bad guys. This is not one of those, like, questionable, oh gosh, this is hard, there's a lot of sides here. No, they just invaded Ukraine. They are not, even if you want to take the best Russian line about the Donbass, and there's Russian speakers there who want to be part of Russia, they're now invading the part that does not want to be part of Russia. This is sheer nationalistic expansion. We tend to be against the people who just randomly invade other countries. And yet that's where the Republican Party is. It is all tied up with Trump. And I think that the interesting question for me is how the indictments are going to shift this. Because I think one thing just about sort of Putin's conduct of the war, and also about the way the Republicans were thinking about it, is Putin has to hold out for another year, Trump gets elected, and then the aid stops and Ukraine collapses. I think that's simplistic for a bunch of reasons, including the fact that we're not the only players here. Europe is obviously also giving a lot of aid to Ukraine. But I think that as the odds that Trump will get elected decline, and I think that you have to think that with the quality of the indictment we just got, that the odds of Trump getting elected, despite Biden's low approval ratings and all the rest of it, and despite my general suspicion that procedural crimes are kind of hard to get people on. If you think about Clinton, like he indisputably did a bunch of bad stuff and it just didn't matter. That this is actually going to make it very hard for him to get reelected, which I think has to change Republican calculations as well as Putin's calculations about what works politically as well as militarily in Ukraine.
Jennifer, your thoughts?
Well, just to clarify, of course, violation of the espionage is not a procedural crime. Those would be obstruction and lying to the government and so on. But I do agree that the Republicans are now so tied to this kind of nationalistic right-wing dictatorship mindset that what we see as war crimes, what the world sees as war crimes, they somehow become infatuated with. And they have begun to identify with Putin, and Putin's begun to identify with them. His last list of people, you recall, who are banned from the Soviet Union, from Russia, can't vacation Russia anymore, are Trump's political domestic opponents, lawyers and so on who have opposed him. So there is this bizarre synergy. There's this bizarre alliance between the two of them. But I would say this, what we saw in the debt ceiling fight is that there are 50 or so Republicans who are really kind of in the MAGA out to lunch crowd. That is not a position, particularly on Ukraine, that is held by Senate Republicans in particular, but also, frankly, a majority of the Senate House members. So I think it's a question of whether Kevin McCarthy can, first of all, stay in his position, and second of all, keep something on the floor. Because if there is, I think there is a House majority as well as a Senate majority to keep funding Ukraine. And I think if Republicans are seen as sabotaging Ukraine at the moment they are beginning their offensive, and I would commend the contributing piece by Ben Hodges, former Lieutenant General of NATO in Europe, that we're just beginning the counteroffensive. If they are seen as the ones who are thwarting Ukraine's defense, that is a really, really big problem for the party. And I just cannot help but marvel at the complete role reversal. It wasn't but a couple decades ago that the Democrats were weak on dictatorships, weak on national security, always making excuses for the bad guy, and now the roles, of course, are completely reversed.
Well, who knew that the Russia-Ukraine part of this conversation would be the most fascinating for me, especially Megyn taking it from Russia-Ukraine to tying it to Trump's domestic legal issues was thoroughly fascinating. Jennifer Rubin, Megyn McArdle, as always, thank you both very much for coming to First Look. Have a good weekend.
You too.
You too.
Head to WashingtonPostLive.com to find out more information about next week's interviews and to register. I'm Jonathan Capehart. Thank you for watching Washington Post Live's First Look.